Thank you for that. I'm going to convene now a magnificent final panel. We have here already, they're already sitting down and resumed their places. I think we're missing Mr. Kruger. The way this is going to go down is as follows. These experts who I will soon introduce will be in conversation with me for about a half an hour, 35 minutes. And then we're going to open up to discussions from the audience. You can tell I'm a risk taker after this morning. So, but I will call on you to speak, and we really would hope that many of you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of opinions and haven't had a chance to express them because you're just, been participating. So this is a chance to hear your feedback, and we will hopefully be able to wrap this up. And again, we hope at the end of the conference that we're going to put out a executive summary of the different sessions, the major points that were raised. And I want to thank Russell Starlack, an incoming doctoral student from Berkeley. I know Stanford, but we decided to let him take the notes anyway. We're grateful for him taking these. So, let me give a hand. We have, starting off, this is a very personal introduction, Mr. Joe Kruger. Everybody who works professionally, if they're smart, has an expert who is more knowledgeable than them they can turn when they need help. And I've had that with Joe Kruger for 25 years. He has been in the climate space and has been a personal advisor to me. He started off after he completed his degree at UC Berkeley in environmental and energy policy, working at the US EPA, eventually basically running the emissions trading program, got very involved during the Kyoto Accords, and was a central member of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC, and was even in that vaunted group that won the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, if you go to his house, you can see the certificate on the wall. And since that time, he's found all kinds of other things. He worked in the Council for Environmental Quality with Nancy Sutley. He has been at Resources for the Future, most recently at the Georgetown Center for Climate Change at the law school there. And he is somebody who has both institutional memory and interesting things to say. So thank you for coming, Joe. Boaz Keidar is the head of the Sustainable Planning and Energy group in Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality. He has a master's degree in design from the London's Royal College of Arts and did his doctorate in urban planning at the University of Maryland. But for those of us in the environmental space, we know that he is one of the most approachable, professional, and smart people working in government. It is not easy to stay with these kind of credentials as a local civil servant, and he does it, and Tel Aviv is the beneficiary, and we're so grateful to have you on the panel. I remember when I went to the Johannesburg Summit for Sustainability, I think it was 2002, and there was another person on the delegation, and it was Orli Ronen, who was at the time working at the Heschel Center for Sustainability, and she was going to a city's urban gathering, and she said, I'm skipping all this stuff, I'm going to the serious stuff. I said, well, this is here, we're at the UN, we're talking about big issues. She says, no, what matters is municipal action, and she's been there ever since, and has really emerged as Israel's leading expert. She's a Tel Aviv University head of the laboratory. Help me out here.
Well, it changes all the time. Right now, it's sustainability and climate.
We'll call it that, but she's at Tel Aviv, but mostly she is a consultant to the city of Tel Aviv. We heard today that she helped out with the Ministry of Environment's adaptation plans, Klima. She was one of the people who envisioned that group. So she's really somebody who brings expertise to this. And our final panelist, Barton, or is he known locally, Buzz Thompson, is somebody who, if you are in the water, law, and policy space for many years, is sort of a giant in the field. He's a global expert on natural resources. He also was a founding director of the Woods Environmental Institute. I think we had Chris here yesterday, but this was even before there was a sustainability school at Stanford. They still cared about the environment, and the Woods Institute did it. He started it, and we're so glad to have him with us. Welcome, Buzz.
Thanks.
You've been involved in climate policy initiatives. Can we be heard here? No. Oh. No.
It's everybody but you.
Everybody, somebody knows what they're doing back there. Okay, so Joe, you've been involved in climate initiatives at both the national and local level for decades. Could you give us some historical context? When did the need for a climate resilience agenda emerge? And did the national, community, or US federal policies give this area of climate policy the attention it deserved? And if not, why not?
First of all, thank you, Alon. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Let me do it.
Take his.
Okay. First, thank you, Alon. Thanks to the organizers of this conference. I think it's been a great couple of days, and I appreciate having been invited. It's been great for me. Instead of, I don't want to give a very detailed historical dissertation here, but let me just, in a minute or two, just kind of do a quick summary. Resilient and adaptation really began to achieve or receive attention in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, in parallel with warnings on climate change. As the climate started changing, people started thinking more about climate impacts and what could be done about climate impacts. And during that period, there was research by the IPCC and many others about concerns about climate change. A lot of the policy response focused on mitigation in the early days. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but I think one reason was there was hope that by really focusing on reducing emissions, we could head off the atmospheric temperature changes and the significant impacts. And it was almost considered defeatist to talk about resilience or climate change or resilience or adaptation, that was throwing in the towel, and that really what we wanted to talk about was how to avoid even getting to that place. Time went on in the late 90s and 2000s, and the research started to show that some of the effects and impacts of climate change were starting to be locked in. And at that point, there started to be a greater emphasis on adaptation and resilience planning, both in the US and internationally. Also disasters in the US like Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the superstorm Sandy in 2012, at least in the US, really raised public awareness, drove home the potential impacts of climate change, and really kind of changed the US policy discourse. It continued to be pretty fragmented, though, in the US and also internationally. Things improved, I believe, with the Obama administration when they started to really look at the federal level, what could the federal government do to support local governments, support cities, support states. They ran a very extensive task force with state and local and tribal leaders on adaptation. They released toolkits and tools that could be used so that we could develop a whole of government solution. That was kind of the buzzword. We need to address adaptation and resilience at all levels of government. The Paris Agreement in 2015 explicitly included adaptation as a global goal. So that's sort of how it's developed. I think it still doesn't get the attention it deserves, resilience and adaptation. There's a lot more attention to mitigation. We can talk a little bit later maybe about how I think they're really integrated, and it's good to think about them together anyway. But from a policy standpoint, people continue in some ways to think we can mitigate our way out of it, although that's much less than it was back originally. So that's sort of where how things develop.
Now, in recent years, particularly when you're at Georgetown, I know you served as a consultant to various and sundry states within the US. Is there anyone in this space of climate resilience that you would say are doing a better job, or a job that's worth paying attention to, or somebody that you think that the state level at least is stepping up?
Well, obviously California. I mean, there are other states that are also doing a good job. California is a leader and always has been in this space. And both at the state level and, as we've heard, some incredible presentations at the local level, at the city level, at the county level, that really is the leader in the United States. That said, there are some other states that are notable. I work a lot with states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. I would say Massachusetts and New York have really strong programs. Maryland, my home state, is doing some really interesting things, particularly in the area of coastal resilience and floodplain management and coordination with local governments. I think a common denominator among the states who are leaders, or several common denominators, is that they embed climate resilience in local planning documents, and that really raises the floor for all communities. In some cases, and we've heard about this in California, in several of the presentations, they actually provide money. They provide financing for planning, and that can be pretty critical, particularly for local governments who don't have a lot of resources. I think the leaders prioritize equity and building capacity in communities so that outcomes are more inclusive and effective. They're good at coordinating across multiple agencies and departments, as we've talked about in the conference. That resilience is complicated. It cuts across everything, and so coordination is really important. I think the presentation yesterday from Frank Bigelow from Cal Fire was really interesting. He talked about the state does building codes for fire protection. They do real estate disclosures. They do low-cost information on low-cost retrofits that homeowners can have, and they make financial assistance available to make homes resilient. So it's kind of a comprehensive approach.
And my last question to you in this initial round is this. Look, you, during your government service, served in administrations that were both Republican and Democrat. So we could say you're sort of a bipartisan history in that respect. You worked at the Bipartisan Center for Energy. And so I'm wondering if you could address the elephant in the room. And that is, of course, the recent reversal of climate change policy at the federal level. Do you feel it's different than past changes in climate policy under other administrations? And if so, what is the path forward?
Yeah, good question. I think some things are different, some things are the same. Let me talk about what's the same, and I'll focus maybe on sort of what the response is from civil society when there's sort of a change. And there really has been, it's almost like a swinging pendulum that we've seen for decades. If you think about it, think about Bush 1 to Clinton, Clinton to Bush 2, Bush 2 to Obama, Obama to Trump, Trump to Biden, Biden to Trump. You know, and you think about how dramatically many policies, but climate policy that I work on has changed each time. And so there is an established playbook that civil society and those of us who work on climate change and want action on climate change have used. I like to think there's sort of three aspects of it. First of all, we try to defend existing programs, and that is going on right now through litigation. There have been some dramatic changes proposed to climate-related programs, including programs that affect climate resilience and grant programs that go to state and local governments. So defending those, you know, through mobilization of advocates, potentially politically in Congress at some point. We'll see what happens as the budget bill develops in the Senate, but also in 2026 if there's changes in Congress. So that's number one, defending. Number two, and this is really critical, and it applies to some of the people in this room, is we've always looked at state and local governments to carry the weight during these periods, to continue to innovate, to continue to lead, to continue to try out new technologies and effective government structures and better ways to engage with vulnerable communities and climate justice. And that then informs things as we get to the next phase, you know, if the pendulum swings back. And finally, and sort of related to that, to plan strategically for the next window of opportunity. So partly it's innovation at the state and local level, but it's also thinking through what would we need to do next time to be more effective. Somebody mentioned this morning, to get more durable sources of financing and funding, and many other aspects. So that's what's the same. Quickly, it gets a little bit negative. If I talk about what's different this time, I think many of you probably know. To me, the biggest difference and the most painful living in Washington, D.C. is the loss of human capital. People are leaving federal service in droves, not just at EPA, my former agency, at the Department of Energy, at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, at Housing Department, at the Federal Emergency Management Association. They're losing kind of the next generation, in some cases, young people who are leaving. Also, some of the most experienced people who are near retirement are leaving. I'll give you one example. My old office at EPA, the Office of Atmospheric Programs, was just essentially abolished and reorganized. 200 people who work on climate change, includes things like the Energy Star program, which everybody loves, that creates standards for appliances and buildings and things like that. This is the group that did the original acid rain cap and trade program. This is the group that does the greenhouse gas inventory, which apparently the US is not going to submit in the next few years anymore internationally. And that was a group I managed at some point when I was at EPA. So that to me is really painful. There's huge cuts in funding for science and climate science. The Office of Research and Development has been abolished at EPA. And the third thing is, and I won't really elaborate, but it's challenges to the rule of law. And that's all of us think about that. So I'll stop there, but maybe to end on a more optimistic note, come back to states and cities and localities. Everyone always trots out this cliche when things aren't working at the federal level, is that we need to look to cities and states for what former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis called the laboratories of democracy, that the state and local governments are the laboratories of democracy. It's there where they can try out on a smaller scale, new approaches and so forth, and it continues to really be valuable.
Thanks so much. I wanted to move over to Orli Ronen now, if I could. And Orli, as I mentioned, years ago, you were going to international gatherings of mayors and municipal leaders. Do you think that resilience is primarily a local challenge, perhaps more so than mitigation? In other words, if you were advising a new mayor coming in, where would you ask them to put their emphasis?
First of all, thanks, not for the question, but also for the question, but for the conference, for the opportunity to share, for the opportunity to take time, and in a way to even sort of reevaluate where we are, where we're at, and what our next goals should be. And I think if anything comes out of this conference, and yes, it may be that it becomes a pivotal event, the Stanford Conference of 2025, and people will be studying it. Well, hopefully. But going back to where you began, where did I go in Johannesburg when you offered to go to the main plenary? I went to an ICLEI conference, and the ICLEI conference, ICLEI is one of actually it's the oldest network of sustainable cities. It was established in late 80s, actually in Canada. Since then, it has become a global network. And at that time, they were conferring on how to ensure that local governments have a seat at the plenary, because they weren't recognized by the international governance. Cities were not recognized as an agency, as an entity. They did not have, by now they do, but they did not have a seat at the table. And it's also really interesting to see that about a decade ago, Benjamin Barber published his last book. Do you know what it was called? Anybody? When Mayors Rule the World. So the possibility, and I'm not sure how many of us will agree with it, but there is that possibility. And I think that the interesting question is that a viable possibility, and is that a potential solution to where we're at? Because we've been discussing climate at this conference, obviously, but we need to take into account that in the past 25 years, since the advent of the 21st century, there's been another explosion. In 2008, more or less, we passed the 50%. That is, for the first time, as far as we know, in the history of mankind, most of us live in cities. By now, it's about 57, 58%. So if most of us live in cities, it only seems logical that solutions should come from cities. But what we're seeing for the past 25 years is that cities are not defined as being places necessarily of culture, of beauty, of well-being, but, and as the Sustainable Development Goals define the target for cities, again, anybody knows? So the target, SDG 11, the target for cities is by 2030 to become sustainable, equitable, and resilient. So just, I mean, when you think about it, why should cities become resilient? Because in the last 25 years, the thing that they've had to address more than anything are crises, not only climate crisis, but security crisis, wars, famine, and climate. So resiliency has become a critical urban issue. And I think that sort of brings it in together in this conference to begin thinking of how to create cities where resilience doesn't have to be a defining urban characteristic. And I think that's one of the challenges. That is not to say that cities should not be resilient, but to say that it should not be the backbone of current urban living.
So let me ask you this. You teach courses on the subject, so we're going to ask to limit
So
the
how
time.
come I haven't been successful?
But no, but I did think maybe you could share, since you have almost an encyclopedic knowledge of different initiatives around the globe, mayors or creative city workers who've done interesting things in the resilient space, maybe 2 or 3 examples that would be valuable that we haven't heard yet. We've been sort of based on these 2 cities and maybe what is around them, but you have a much broader scope. So share with us some creative good things that you've seen.
Happily. So I'd like to dedicate the first share to my inspiration. It's the mayor of Curitiba. Curitiba is a city in southern Argentina, and the mayor was actually this week is the Yortzeit. How do you say Yortzeit in English?
The Memorial Day.
Okay, so it's the Memorial Day of his death. He actually passed away 4 years ago on May 27th. So in his memory, and Jaime Lerner was the mayor of, as I said, of Curitiba. It's a city of about 1.8 million, 2 million people, facing many, many challenges. He came into office at the late 70s, early 80s, and he brought with him not only a vision, but also an exceptional professional capacity. He was an architect and a planner. He actually began working in the city, in the planning division of the city. And then he came to the understanding that if he really wanted to change something, then he had to get political power, because professional power wasn't enough to instigate change. And he looked at the city and he said, there are 3 things we need to change here. First of all, the way that we move in the city, the way that we deal with our waste, and the way that we manage our open spaces. And he initiated 3 amazing programs. The first is now known as BRT, Bus Rapid Transit. He actually invented the concept and also designed the bus stops. They're not,
Bus stops,
they're not really bus stops, they're sort of bus tunnels and he always said that when he consulted with his consultant, he asked them, what do we need to do to resolve our transportation challenge? And they said, well, that's obvious, build an underground. And he said, that's a great idea. It's not going to be an underground. It's not going to be under the ground, and it's not going to be a train. And he took the idea and transposed it to overground, and he actually designed those tubes, stop tubes, in order to reduce the time the bus has to stop at the stop, because you don't have to get up. You're already there on the same level as the bus. You don't have to pay beforehand. And again, we're talking about 25 years ago. So you don't have to pay the driver. And he actually reduced the time. So it's working exactly like a subway, except it isn't. And I think it's like cheaper by about 90%. So that was his main revolution. And then he said, well, since we have a great bus system, let's use it for more purposes. And he came up with this idea that you could persuade people to separate their waste if you give them incentives. And his incentive was bus tickets or bus tokens. So if you you separate your organic waste, you bring in your organic waste, you get in place of the organic waste you just deposited, you get bus tokens. So obviously that worked amazingly well in the favelas. And so he succeeded in doing two things: resolving a waste problem and treating the organic waste, which is, as we all know, is a huge challenge, and also overcoming some of the mobility challenges that people in the favelas with no systems had. And the last thing he tackled was open spaces, and he also did some amazing things there. Anyway, for me, that's really, I think he's the guy who got me in.
Wonderful testimonial. Well, let's talk about some of the key political, technological, social, or psychological barriers that you've seen towards resilience programs in different cities, and maybe some of your sage advice about how local leaders can overcome it.
Sage?
Nothing less, you've come of age.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think that, it's really going back to where I started. I think that one of our main problems is, and I'll use the term, mainstreaming what we're doing. Because the thing is that in many places, and I think in many municipalities, both in the States, in Israel and elsewhere, environmental problems, climate problems are considered to be the responsibility of the environmental unit, authority, or whoever is in charge. So it's not really a municipal problem, it's an issue, and there's somebody who has to deal with it. And once it's put in that corner, usually that's where a lot of us are staying. And although we're succeeding in putting a foot in the door, we're still not invited, like Italy in 2002, we're not invited necessarily to the main table. And I think that's the crucial problem, how to mainstream climate policy and climate adaptation in cities. And what we're seeing today is that there are more and more, I'd say, means of mainstreaming. One of them, for instance, is statutory planning, like they're doing now in Tel Aviv, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world, is where you sort of, again,
you bolster or you
anchor.
Anchor?
Where you anchor, thanks, where you anchor the policies within the mainstream policies of the municipality. So you don't have to rely on the next mayor or even on the political vision of the mayor. It's there. There are designated budget lines. There's designated personnel. There are set plans and policies and ordinance. So it doesn't have to be discussed every time you want to instigate a change. It's there already. And I think that this understanding is really a key issue for mainstreaming.
That's a terrific point. Boaz, you may have the clearest view of what Tel Aviv is doing and not doing in order to improve its resilience. So if you named one thing that you think Tel Aviv is doing right, maybe you could share it with us. And listen.
Thank you, Alon, and thanks again for these wonderful 2 days. I could give a whole grocery list of things that Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality is doing. I could talk about the urban forestry master plan and about our local policy for green building and housing and open space. But Orli actually gave me a great segue, ending with mainstreaming. So I want to take it a step back, if you will. For us to have something that we mainstream, these initiatives first have to evolve and to sort of sprout somewhere. And I want to borrow a term that a colleague of mine coined. It's called bureaucrat activism. So bureaucrat activism.
I think he's even in the room, this colleague, because I've heard him use it. Where's Eitan?
No, he's actually not here.
Unfortunately, he's not here.
No, he's not here, but he's a dear friend, and some people here know him. But what does it mean to be an active bureaucrat? It means to actually come from within the system with sort of a grassroots vision and understand where you want your city or your public policies to be in the next phase. The next step is mainstreaming, but it's like Orli said, once we have our foot in the door with these initiatives, we don't relax, we don't sit back in our chairs, we work on the next thing. But this is something that you have under your belt, and will be in place when you're faced with the next project or with the next challenge. And I just want to say, I think I'm a bit of an oddball in this, maybe even in the room. I come from the field of green building. So I'm an industrial designer, architect, and urban planner. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm a local regulator in Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality, and I meet developers on a daily basis. So you can't just have the sticks without the carrots, right? And we all know what the sticks are, right? As local regulators, we put in place these policies, and they're very stringent. I don't know if you all are aware, but Tel Aviv-Yafo has I think the most ambitious green building and sustainable planning policy in the country. I think I can say with certainty that it is even progressive in comparison to some of the larger American cities. But you can't have the sticks with no carrots. And the carrots in this sense is the developers coming to an understanding that, okay, I'm going to use the LEED rating system as an example, although it's not that common in Israel. I'm going to give you a LEED gold building. I, as a developer, I'm doing it because otherwise you won't approve my plans, but the end game here is I'm giving my customer a better product. That better product will translate to their home, the most expensive thing a person buys in their lifetime, being more climate ready, healthier, more energy efficient, better to live in. It's a better product. Who doesn't want to get a better product?
So if we can talk about what Tel Aviv isn't doing, let's say we could be optimistic, and all of a sudden $200 million in funding for climate resilience fell your way. Where would you put that in? And do you prioritize these kind of things through a explicit risk assessment, implicit one? How would you pick the project or the initiative to spend that $200 million that I'm dangling before you?
What's that in shekels?
$1 million
Sorry,
shekels. We're going
sorry.
$1 billion shekels.
I'm going to say two things. First one is, and I think there are some of you that will share this notion. I don't think that money is an obstacle to resilience or to forward-thinking sustainable planning. Tel Aviv-Yafo is very economically strong. Thanks for that. But I don't think that money is the resource that is always in need, not just in Tel Aviv, elsewhere too. I think the most needed resource in local government is cooperation. And it's getting the people who sit at the top and make the decisions to buy into your initiatives. But I said my answer is actually two. So if you twist my arm, I'm gonna say a really comprehensive green retrofit program for our some 40,000 buildings. Our building stock in Tel Aviv is mostly aged. A lot of the residential condominiums were built in the 1960s, roughly between the 50s and 70s. None of them are up to code in terms of building envelope. And I think you talked about implicit and explicit threats. I think something we are going to, there was a speaker here yesterday who kept using the term freight train of pain yesterday. I think yes, all this housing stock is not well insulated, and people pay through the nose air conditioning their homes, 8 months out of the year. This is for cooling. I think that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what can happen in a long-term heat wave or combined heat wave, power outage, some other emergency that we have. So
My last question to you is this, and it's going back to this notion of the activist bureaucrat. Do you think the politicians at the local level get it? And how can you thoughtfully and strategically influence their priorities and get them to get it?
By running for government.
well, there's a local politician in the room, so I better watch what I say. No,
we think
no,
he gets
upfront.
it. We
He
think
gets it.
he
He gets it. I'm gonna go with an analogy here. Professor Stephen Chu last night showed us, he ended his presentation with an image of the Titanic. So, and you saw the captain or the officer on duty, trying to sing the iceberg. He's trying to sway and trying to avoid hitting it. I think our politicians get it. I think we should give them much more credit than we usually give them. They have a lot on their plate, and it's this our caveman brains, not reacting to very immediate, close, tangible threats, as opposed to very far-reaching, sort of fuzzy, somewhere out in the future threats that sometimes make them prioritize other things. But going back to the ship, I think it takes a while to turn the ship, and there's no other way other than being aboard and being a part of the system and influencing it from within, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Thank you.
Sure. Professor Thompson, wrapping up this part of the final session, you have, over the years, analyzed a whole disparate and broad array of environmental challenges. Where would you place climate, in particular climate resilience, within the urban context? And to what extent do you think that central, particularly local governments, are rising to the occasion, if it is a major one?
Okay, thanks. I'll answer that question, but I can't resist first adding on a couple of thoughts about the Trump administration, only because I actually think that things are even worse, because what President Trump is effectively doing at this point is systematically trying to undercut and destroy all of the institutions that are essential to solving the problems of climate change. And so that's not only the governmental agencies, which you're absolutely right, are being decimated. It's the universities that have historically produced a lot of the knowledge and information which is necessary to solve the challenges. It's the legal system and the rule of law, which is going to be necessary if we are going to require corporations and other entities to actually comply with various regulations. And it's even the state and local governments. As a lot of you know, the Congress just last week voted to eliminate California's new vehicle emission standards in a move which I think is actually invalid. And I hope the courts ultimately hold that. And I mentioned that not to try to depress everybody even more, but simply to emphasize that at some point we're going to need to stand up. And I think we're probably going to need to do that before the 2026 elections in order to actually ensure that the institutions that we need remain standing.
Everything you just said might be applicable to Israel as well, but we'll move forward.
Yeah. So I want to get to your question. So I don't need to tell this audience that the climate crisis is existential. That there is nothing, I think, approaching it, at least if you are not just immediately focused on the short run. There is nothing approaching it that threatens both human health And we've heard about that over the last 2 days, whether it's availability of water on the one hand, whether it's heat, whether it's wildfires, all of that is a threat to humans themselves, or whether it's a threat to our economies, because our economies are ultimately reliant also upon a stable environment. And it was mentioned a moment ago, this is particularly true in the urban areas. The world as a whole, we are now a majority urban residents. In the United States, the last time I saw a figure, I think it's 87% of Americans live in metropolitan areas. And if you then look at the urban areas, those urban areas are frequently built in the environments which are most sensitive, are most at risk. They tend to be built along the coast or along river plains, areas which are particularly prone, for example, to flooding or sea level rise. And to make the problem even worse for cities, cities face, as again you've heard already, a panoply of problems. In the Western United States, cities are going to have to deal with challenges of climate resilience at the same time that they're still dealing with problems of increased growth, and you're dealing with the issue of homelessness. And so cities are going to have to be able to actually integrate and solve those problems jointly. And then the final question you asked is basically, how well are cities doing? They're doing a lot better than they were doing 10 years ago. And cities like Los Angeles and Tel Aviv are doing things which I think are actually quite imaginative and are roadmaps for others. But if you look at urban areas as a whole around the world, Yale did a survey that was, the results were released at Climate Week in New York last fall. And they surveyed, I think it was over like 120 cities in 52 countries around the world. Less than half of them had any type of a climate resilience policy, and less than a quarter of those climate resilience policies address the health implications of climate. So again, this is a fantastic conference because we're learning a lot of really valuable lessons here, but one of the important things is going to be spreading those lessons out to all of the other urban areas.
Now, as somebody who sits now at Stanford, which has I should say, an unparalleled reputation in the sustainability area, is there something that academia should be doing or could be doing, both in terms of scientific research, policy analysis, that you would like to see it doing given the present challenges? In other words, has somebody who ran an environmental institute, what kind of challenges would you like the academics amongst the researchers to take on?
Yeah, so let me give you two answers to that. The first thing is that those of us who are academics have a responsibility not only to do the research that we're doing right now, but also to get the results of that research out and adopted in action, which means that we need to partner with cities and other governmental agencies and businesses to actually address the problems that they're facing, and that, you know, probably some others have said this already, but historically, what do academics get rewarded for? We get rewarded for finishing our research, writing a paper, and getting it published in a top journal. And we don't tend to get rewarded beyond that. Stanford and the Doerr School of Sustainability has created a sustainability accelerator whose goal is really to take research here at Stanford and try to get it out as quickly as possible, both on the technological side as well as on the policy side, which I think is in some ways even more difficult for academics. So one of the things I would love to see research institutions do is to recognize, again, this responsibility not only to do the research, but actually get it implemented in action. I was also thinking, as I was sitting and listening to a lot of the speakers over the last couple of days, you know, if I were to focus on a particular research area, where would I focus it on? And I think I would focus it on communications. how are we actually going to educate the public in a way which gets them to support the actions that we're going to need to take in urban areas? We tried to do that on the climate mitigation side, right? We tried, at least in the United States, to get Americans to recognize the importance of taking major climate mitigation actions. And my own evaluation is we sort of failed at that. We've, at least at the moment, we've lost the war on that. But many of the same challenges that we faced on educating the American public about the need for climate mitigation are also relevant to climate adaptation. We have to convince people to sometimes take actions that they don't necessarily want to take. We're going to have to tell people you can't live where you necessarily want to live. And if you have a beachfront home, you can't just put up a seawall to save your particular home, right? So we're going to have to get people to do things that historically they wouldn't have wanted to do. And again, at least in the United States, and one of the things that I've realized over the past couple of days is that I think Israel has a lot of advantages over the United States on some of these issues, but you know, we're going to have to get people to agree that they aren't going to have the same degree of freedom. And then the other thing is that we're going to have to get people to be willing to spend money on things that don't give an immediate payback. To get people to spend money on steps that what we're going to tell them is this is going to help you 10 or 20 years down the road. And again, I don't think we do that very well right now. And so I would put a lot more money probably on psychologists to help us think about how we're actually going to be able to communicate these challenges.
Well, to wrap up your questions, let's go ahead 10, 20 years. Based on things we've talked about in this conference, in the climate resilience space, where would you like to see us? What might be happening or could be happening if we rose to the challenge, and where would be different if we met her in 10, 20 years and said, okay, we've checked this off or we've addressed this. What kind of things do you think are the priorities for the agenda? Because there's a lot that could be done.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fascinating question. One of the things that I would like to see is a more integrated effort at addressing the issue of climate resilience. And by that, I'm suggesting that our efforts right now are highly fragmented. So you have one city here which may be doing something, this city isn't doing anything. And a lot of these cities are sort of small and they don't necessarily have the expertise or the funding to do anything. And then we also have fragmentation in terms of function. So the people who handle water supply issues are not necessarily the people who handle wastewater issues. And so when somebody starts talking about increasing water recycling, the problem that we frequently have in the United States is those two groups don't actually, the two groups that are necessary there, the people who produce the water and the people who have the wastewater, don't necessarily talk to each other. They don't even necessarily know each other. They may hate each other. And so what we need is integration both geographically, I think, and integration across functions. And also, and this may be an example of the geographic integration here in the United States, in a better integration between the federal government, the states, and the local government. So I think if we see real progress in 10 years, it's that we're not just talking about Los Angeles and Tel Aviv. It's this integrative network that's focused on climate resilience.
Well, that was terrific. All four of you, I want to salute you and compliment you on your responses. What I'd like now is turn to the audience and say, we've come to the end. Is there anything that maybe we missed at the conference, a point that you think should have been emphasized that wasn't, or that you'd like to recapitulate for us? So please don't be shy. And we've got our first one. Grab please the microphone, and then I don't know if we have somebody to run around to deliver it, but Ethan, thank you. I wanted to thank Ethan coming all the way from Washington, also an EPA lifer, and if you'll be the guy, but you can always, the advantage of having the mic, passing the microphone to Ethan is you can always say something.
So I really started laughing when you said, because it really tied into what
Please
I
introduce
wanted.
yourself before you speak, though.
Oh, my name is Judith Schwartz. I live in Palo Alto and I work in equitable decarbonization. And so it's the policy tied to the communications piece. So we've been hearing all sorts of discussions about this existential problem that we're facing, and everybody in this room agrees with that. And I want to talk to you, speak to your point about why people aren't absorbing it. And I want to, as a hypothesis that you might want to study, is when we make it this huge thing and it's catastrophic and it's overwhelming. And so some people then decide they're going to put their head in the sand because it's just too much and they can't stand it. Do we need to be adopting narratives that people can see how regular people that they can identify with are affected? So a family farmer who can't make their family, and I think that this is one of the places where you can pull in rural communities and people who might not be pulled into the conversation yet, but if it ties to them and it's not just, the earthquake is going to happen and you're going to lose everything and whatever, it just gets to be too much. And so as research institutions, maybe you could do some studies that look at how you test it to see if we talk to people who are living in different kinds of communities and you have a narrative that they can relate to with people that they relate to, do they absorb it better?
Well, I think Professor Larry Diamond last night mentioned a study that he did with regard to when you give people information, can they absorb the challenge of nuclear energy or accept that? We have other hands up would like to
Can I just
speak?
comment?
Hey,
Can I just
yeah,
comment?
yeah, fine.
Only because
You
I
have-
think that's an absolutely great idea. And one of the things that I've been trying to do in a lot of my work, I mean, if I go out and I tell somebody this is what you have to do, they just, unless it's another academic, they don't pay any attention. But if you bring people that are part of their community to come in and talk about what they've done and how it's been successful, then that can make a difference. The other thing is I think there was a piece in like the New York Times on this about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. Turns out one way to actually get people to focus more on climate change is to ask people to write a letter to their kids and grandkids that will be opened in the future, telling them what they did to address climate issues. And that's one of the few things that actually gets them forward looking.
Awesome. Ethan, please introduce yourself.
Great. I love that last suggestion. Thanks so much for having us all here. It's great for us to just share ideas, share perspectives, and share our expertise. That said, I think we have kind of a limited set of audience here. We have some scientists, some people from civil society, we have some lawyers, and we have some people who work maybe at the municipal level on some of the exact issues that the conference is about, which is great. But we're missing more of the people who work on the soft sciences. I think those are the people who are going to save us. Because we have a lot of the data, we have a lot of the ideas, we haven't figured out how to convert them, right? So we have a huge investment, we're not getting a return on the investment. And so at the university level, that might mean having integrated studies. And I talked to Chris Field about this a couple of years ago, that I said, what we also need are implementers and integrators to take the ideas to action. And he said, well, what we're doing at the university level is bringing people together and do joint research, which is good. It's interdisciplinary, but plus or minus, it's research only. So to your point again, Barton, is how do you take the contents of all of years of work to make a paper and to make sure that it's accurate and to make sure that it's pushing us forward and thinking, how do you get that to other people and translate the contents into action? And the internet gives us a lot of possibility on that. So we're doing that. And another group that's missing though is younger people. So we have some of us, not myself not included, but we need people who are like students in here. We have some who even presented. Wonderful. Thank you guys for being here. I hope you're learning and listening because you're going to be the future. But we need more people who are going to be in the future so that they can actually benefit from us. And we have more diversity in every way that we can.
Good point. Looking for another hand. If there's somebody who'd like to say something, I see
Yeah,
Doerr, but
I want to say something.
first of all,
Uh,
did you get yourself?
I am Dror Avisar. I'm a professor of hydrochemistry in Tel Aviv University, currently in Oregon State University. And there is something that we didn't talk at all these important 2 days in order to strengthen the resilience of the cities. I'm talking about water security policy, adopting water security technologies. It's very important. I know that in Israel, the water authority and cities as a national and municipal, even in municipal level, there is programs. I don't know the situation here in LA, in California, but it's something that must be taken as a part of the policy in order to make the cities ready for droughts, floods, extreme weather, heat waves, etc. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Hensel. I'm a retired university president and executive officer for the Council on Undergraduate Research in DC. And I want to respond to the communication, and I think someone said about social sciences. Communication, one of the things that we worked on was how do you communicate with the House and the Senate in DC. And one of the things that we did was to hold congressional briefings, and we brought students in to talk about their work. And one of the things I think I found out, in all of my work, was that adults tend to listen to students more than they listen to faculty. I had to tell our faculty that. They didn't particularly like it, but it's the truth. And so I would encourage any of you who are academics here, you have Rotary clubs, you have Zanta, you have all of these civic organizations that are looking for speakers. Send your students to talk about, because the business community then will share that. And so I think getting students out there to talk about the really great work that they're doing is important. And then the other thing, I was a theater major in college, so I just want to say, I think the arts are another way that we can communicate and can be very, very powerful. So thank you.
Two very thoughtful comments. Thank you for them both. Did I see a hand there, Dalit? Was that? Okay. We have in the back there, please go ahead, Yoav.
Hi, my name is Yoav Perlman. I'm from the Society for Protection of Nature in Israel. I want to follow up what Orli said, that maybe this is the first of many conferences here between Tel Aviv and Los Angeles here in Stanford. And I hope that the next one will be the climate and biodiversity resilience and local government policy. We really need to talk more about biodiversity. Biodiversity is a municipal asset, municipal responsibility, and also so important for the well-being, for the health of the cities. And it needs to be addressed not as an added value, but as a serious value of municipal areas and also of states and nations. Thank you.
Could you hand the microphone to Maya Crabtree right behind you?
Yeah, so my name is Maya Crabtree. I'm from Forum 15, coordinate between cities. I work with cities on climate. And first of all, I'd like to strengthen what you have said. I think we all recognize that these are joint challenges and crises, and definitely cities can have an important role in dealing also with loss of biodiversity. I want to congratulate the organizers. This has been an amazing event, and I want to strengthen what Orli said, and maybe this can become a tradition, and it can be not only lessons from Tel Aviv and Los Angeles, and we can also enlarge the group. And as we all work with many cities, including the city of Tel Aviv, that always shares with many cities, we can widen the gap. What I'd like to address, and maybe we can deal with that in the next conference, if it takes place, is the gap between planning and implementation. That's an issue which is a great concern for us for many years. And we're talking a lot of planning and important issues, how we get people around the table, all the voices, etc. But one of the main gaps is between planning and implementation. That's usually where the money is needed, or administrations change, for better, for worse. also on the local level. And many times it's just that we plan things and they're not so feasible. So I would be happy to hear maybe the panel's opinion about those, or just discuss it next time.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Shira from Aklima, where I was speaking before. I think also another topic that we didn't address enough, it was very, and it was mentioned yesterday very shortly, is about food security and agriculture. It's a very strong issue of climate, both mitigation and adaptation. And so if you look at municipalities, the question is always whether it could be an issue of municipalities, which every farmer, every cropland belongs physically to any municipality, city or rural. So it's always a question of whether it's something that would also be involved in the city and in the countryside in a municipal level.
Thank you, Shiva. So as we move to the end, there's a lot of thank yous that I would like to offer. So if I can ask, Elise, are you around here? Can we have the CDDRL staff that are, if they're still working out in the lobby? They're already head off before we do that. So Larry, it's up to you to represent the CDDRL. The delegation from the city of Tel Aviv wanted to make a small gesture of their appreciation. And so if you would come up here, and whoever's presenting, we'd like to have a little bit of a ritual here as a, it's enough to say thanks, but words are cheap. We're going to have a small gift here. Okay.
Larry, this has been astonishing for us in so many ways that are both practical and spiritual. The fact that we have been able so productively to share, to learn with, to get feedback about our own experience, the fact that you created what allowed this forum to take place is really, really wonderful. I think that we will feel the effects for months and years in the future, and it's just been a very powerful, beautiful, rare experience. And at a moment like this, in the broadest sense, when it feels like things are fragile and when it feels like people find it hard increasingly to speak to one another, even to be in the same room, the fact that you facilitated this forum is something that is just inspiring, fills me with optimism, and fills me and us especially with gratitude.
So having said that,
Well, I'll just say, first of all, thank you. And I can't wait to visit you all in Tel Aviv. That's for sure true. Now we have to figure out a way to move up the timetable for that. Not only myself, but my colleagues. We're already beginning to imagine another conference, maybe on an adjacent topic that you don't even know about, but I'll just kind of repeat what I said at the beginning. Number one, we want this to be a two-way flow of mutual learning, hopefully cooperative research and education and dialogue. And obviously this is really the evolving and truly existentially challenging issue of our time. The other kind of evolving and at least somewhat existential issue that I specialize on is one that, lurks behind, which is the challenges we both face in our countries of preserving democratic governance, constitutionalism, rule of law, civil society, mutual respect, a civic culture. You know, we tested boundaries at this meeting. It was challenging. We didn't quite know what would happen. And I think on the whole, it's been a phenomenal success. This is not only the largest gathering of Israelis coming to Stanford University since October 7th. It's probably one of the largest ever. And you know, I can only say, speaking personally, what Alon said, what's been said by many of you very eloquently, and including at the start of this final session. Obviously, we feel the enormous pain of what has happened to Gaza, in Gaza, and obviously we have shared in many ways since the beginning of our Israel Studies program, and then watching from a distance the horror of October 7th, the feeling of outrage, dread, mourning, there aren't really nouns or adjectives to describe it. What the state of Israel experienced that day and in the aftermath, and still with the hostages who are missing. But, you know, you can't hold individuals responsible for the behavior of their states, and you have to put everything in context. And the problem we face in our own society from multiple ends of the political spectrum, and that Israel faces as well, is the human tendency to want to paint everything in black and white. Colonizers and colonized, oppressors and oppressed, and that's it, and that's all that needs to be said. So I think we have made a lot of progress in insisting on a more reasoned and complex discussion of that issue in its proper time and place. And we've dealt with it in other times and places, while we address all the other things that are happening and treat Israel as it has a right to be treated, as a normal society that has done and achieved amazing things and innovations that represent part of the reason that so many students and others were here in this room wanting to learn, the reason why so many students want to go with Gordon Bloom and Sarah Singer in the past and the next time to a summer visit to Israel, the reason why someday we still dream, and I think we will achieve, to establish the Stanford in Israel program, all of that. So I'll just close by saying that I'm very embarrassed. I don't think that I don't have a gift to give you in exchange, but I hope maybe for all of you, this conference, this weather, this partnership, and Alon Tal's amazing leadership has at least been something of the gift I think we owe you.
Is there anybody from Los Angeles? Do you have something to give them as well?
Yeah.
So let's have, why don't you step up, for even though you're from the county, if they want to represent Los Angeles in the front, I think they wanted to give you a gift as well. Or is Marta here? Come on up here. Karen, we have a city representative, so we're gonna, let's have some Los Angeles up here. Absolutely. That's the last.
This is a new partnership. We already established relationship, and we will continue after the conference as well.
And there's some pencils which Orli Ronen wants to give out as well. So you can, if you would like to have that as a cultural exchange as well. I'm going to wrap it up just with Tel Aviv University has pencils.
And the last one from, I think, from everybody, to Alon for organize everything. He deserves all the round of applause possible. From Tel Aviv with love.
Wow. So before I send us all on our way, again, I had support and help from an entire center here at Stanford, the CDDRL staff. I don't think any of them are in the hall, but I could bring them to thank you. But Eliza will represent them, Eliza Schoenberg, who was doing all the behind the scenes work. I want to thank the Stanford University Police. And most of all, I want to thank you all for coming out and being with us to the bitter end, last people standing. Have a wonderful weekend. Happy Shavuot for those who are celebrating, and maybe we'll see you in the future.